Welcome to the Daily Objective, fresh from, okay, not really fresh, there's jet lag, but fresh from Ocon and from Washington, D.C. And I'm today with Mark to discuss the big news of the day, the big story of the day, which is the Uber leaks. What are the Uber leaks? The Guardian, the progressive newspaper in the UK, has released some journalistic research based on hundreds of thousands of texts, messages, email. We have no idea how they got leaked, but they supposedly give us an insight in the shocking way that Uber forced or bulldozed its way into the markets of the world and became the giant that it is today. So the news are already everywhere, even in the Greek media. You see stories about how this is shocking, how this is sheds a light into the nasty and the very shady tactics and the very shady way that the Silicon Valley giants proceed their profit. So, Mark, are you ready to be shocked and be very concerned about where neoliberalism is taking us?
Hey, nowadays I'm in a constant state of shock. So bring it on.
Okay. So without further delay, let's see what is the gist of this story. So the gist is that what actually happened is that Uber did the very unprecedented thing of lobby policymakers to allow it to exist and to allow it to operate. If you break through all the big headlines and all the hatred for Uber, this is what it comes down to. Uber was lobbying. Now, I will base my analysis on the main article in The Guardian, and we will go through all their arguments because I want to stillman this as much as possible. So we will see what are their points and why, in my view, this is all, I don't want to say BS, but whatever the kind way to say BS is.
Much ado about nothing. How's that?
Much ado about nothing. So what do we see? We see that, quote, Uber tried to shore up support by discreetly carting prime minister, presidents, billionaires, oligarchs, and media barons.
Wait, what? 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 That was my version of shock.
So support for what though? Because this could be shocking, right? Because maybe it's support to, I don't know, to get a privileged position in the market, or support to ban cabs. It turns out though that it is support to be allowed to operate, be allowed to not be, how to put it, not to be banned from operating. So we see that people like the US Vice President Joe Biden, or the French now President and then Minister Macron, or people in the UK cabinet had meetings with Uber executives, and they told them that, you know what you're doing is okay, and we're going to make the case that you should be allowed to work. Again, why this is shocking, I have no idea. Why it is the shocking thing is that in countries like Greece, Uber is not allowed to operate. This is what I find shocking. So why it is shocking that Uber had access to Macron while he was minister, and they were talking to him and saying, look, there are people who are organizing protests against us. They're beating up our drivers. We constantly face problems. Why this is shocking, I have no idea. Another reason that Guardian tells us that Uber did shady things is that they overpassed some local authorities to go straight to the minister. Again, I don't see why it's the problem. If you got a mayor who, like Sadiq Khan, for example, in London, who wants to coerce drivers and actually the passengers not to interact freely, not to interact voluntarily, the first thing you should do is go and see if there's anyone else who has some sympathetic ears and say, hey, why don't these people allow me to operate? So till here, I don't see anything very, very, even noteworthy. And notice how they throw random irrelevant stuff there to try to create an image of Uber as very bad. So listen to this. When the then US Vice President Joe Biden, a supporter of Uber at the time, was late to a meeting with the company at the World Economic Forum at Davos, Travis Kalanick was the former CEO of Uber, texted a colleague, "I've had my people let him know that every minute late he is one less minute he will have with me." What has this got to do with a piece of investigative journalist? Why, when you're trying to portray Uber as someone who is this shady superpower, who is undermining democracy, we're going to check out the undermining democracy argument in a second, how is this relevant to the fact that the CEO was pissed off with someone being late and texting his friends, "Why is this guy late? I'll have less time with him." So they clearly try to create an image here. They clearly try to create this dichotomy. On the one hand, you have the politicians who are the good people and protect public interest. And on the other side, you have the tech giant, the bad capitalist who actually try to undermine democracy and say bad things about politicians. So the Guardian makes this point again and again, that quite often we found Uber executives speaking badly about politicians and calling them things like comedians or something like that. By the way, I'm totally with them. If a politician doesn't allow Uber to operate, that politician should be ridiculed. That politician should be shamed and should be voted out of power, in my humble opinion. So you remain unshocked till now.
No. Wait.
Oh yeah.
Wait, here it is. What? What?
Okay, shock number
That's my
two.
second shock. Yeah, second shock reaction.
Here's another shocking thing about Uber. Quote, "From Moscow to Johannesburg, Uber bankrolled with unprecedented venture capital funding, Uber heavily subsidized journeys, seducing drivers and passengers on the app with incentives and pricing models that would not be sustainable." Okay, let's break this down. One, they had unprecedented venture capital. What does this even mean? This means that there were many people who thought this is a great idea and they gave them money. This capital didn't come from my pockets. This capital didn't come out of the pockets of the Guardian people. This capital came from people who wanted to support Uber. That's the one thing. The other thing is that they quote seduced drivers and passengers. Telling you that something is a good service and cheap is not quote seduce.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Don't you know people are automatons? They
exactly.
Respond, right?
Exactly.
They're automatons. They're like mice. They're like rats in a maze, and they can be led, by stimulus. And there's no way out of that, man. That's just what they are. So Uber's taking advantage of the fact that humans are like rats.
And it gets worse because not only they seduce you, but then we hear they give us incentives and pricing models that are not sustainable. Now, says who? If the price is not sustainable, you know what? I will go to my phone. I will go to the Uber app. I will press it for 3 seconds, and there's an X. You press the X, and Uber app disappears. That's what happens when the pricing is, quote, unsustainable. Also, I have a suggestion to the Guardian editorial team. If you think you can come up with a more sustainable pricing system for a driver's app, more power to you. I'm sure you can create a company better than Uber, and I'm sure you're going to give us a better service than Uber.
I don't understand what sustainable means in this context, because I know what it means in context to things like food and energy. The sustainable argument is really a euphemism for no more human action and do less and deprivation. But what is the sustainable argument for the pricing? Are they claiming that they're trapping people into a low price structure and then they're going to arbitrarily raise the prices once they have market share?
Yes.
Do they know that people have tried that billions of times before in the history of the world and it never works?
Well, this would mean that they know some economics. But still, if this is the case, they should be on our side. Then let another company come in, or a co-op of workers, because they keep saying that Uber is exploiting its drivers. More power for the drivers, I say, to have their own co-op where they get all the money and when they have different tactics. I would be totally supporting it. I would go to the barricades for their right to do so. But guess what? The Guardian wouldn't. So
they don't understand that Uber is competing with several other driving companies like them, like Lyft, for example, also taxis, Metro. There's a billion different choices that people have at any given time that would control that price, don't you think? Anyway, keep going.
The one legitimate, not legitimate, but the one claim I would understand is taxi drivers being pissed off because they're subject to all these regulations. But the solution is not to try to persuade the state to support your cartel type of position. I know they pay too much money for their license, but why should there be a license to be a taxi driver? That's the problem. So they could go to the state and say, give us back our money for our license. There should be no license. Again, I would support them and I would be with them.
Well, the reason it costs what $100,000 or $200,000 to get your taxi medallion in New York is there is a reason for it. It's not the health and safety of the people that you're going to be taxing around. It's for the perpetuation of the bureaucratic state and the regulatory state. So that's why we need it. We need these people to be fed, Nikos.
We need these people to be
wealthy. We want them to be fed and wealthy.
Then we hear that Uber planned to spend an extraordinary 90 million in 2016 in lobbying and public relations. That's exactly why we need to separate politics from the economics. No company should have to lobby, but lobbying means that you are paying money to someone who has more power to you. I've never heard, for example, the mafia going to the poor cafe owner saying, I'm going to pay you money to exert pressure on you. No, it's the other way around. You pay because you are the weak part in this argument. So I'm also pissed off that Uber had to lobby because I don't want anyone to have to lobby, but I'm pissed off with the government. I'm not pissed off with Uber. Okay, here's something that really pissed me off, and I'm not kidding. This really pissed me off. So here's why I'm pissed off very strongly with Uber. In a bid to shape policy debates, it paid prominent academics hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce research that supported the company's claim about the benefits of its economic model. Uber, I'm really pissed off. Why didn't you come to me? I've been supporting you for free. You paid money to people who have no idea why you're good, why you have the moral claim to your profits. Next time, okay, you don't want to fund me, send a super chat to Ayn Rand Center UK, become a Rearden Metal member. I'm sure you can afford it. And I think your money was not money well spent. So next time, choose wisely. Okay, speaking of super chats, thank you very much, Marilyn, for your contribution. And it was so good to see you in Ocon. Roland says, Uber got me to the airport, then British Airways lost my bag. Okay, I'm sorry to laugh at your misery, Roland, but yeah, the airport experience is less and less pleasant these days. Wes, with a generous contribution, thank you, Wes, says, the Uber quote issue is very eye-opening. I'm constantly amazed at how upset people get that another company exists that allows customers to voluntarily associate with something other than the taxi companies. Totally. Now, let's go to the perhaps most, quote, shocking part of the revelation. And it was that the former CEO who had to walk out, Travis Kalanick, supposedly sent Uber drivers to danger and to risk when he encouraged them to participate in protests in France for the right to work. Now, the context is that in France, we had violent taxi drivers organizing protests, often not only in France, but elsewhere. These protests would turn violent.
I was there for those.
Okay. Yeah. And do you know that the Uber drivers were beaten up and stuff?
they were beaten up, tires were burned in the street, their cars were overturned, smashed. Yeah, the taxi drivers were not kind.
And many of them were also, was proven to be like far-right figures. But again, who cares? When you're against the capitalist, anything goes. So if Uber CEO says, I mean, these are like WhatsApp messages. So he says something to the something like, they tell him, is it worth to have a counter demonstration? And he says, I think it's worth it. Violence guarantees success. By the way, this means that we're going to get attention. And then he says, these guys must be resisted. No, agreed that right place and time must be thought out. So basically, when you talk to WhatsApp or whatever, you use language or you make some claims that can be taken out of context. So the Guardian presents this as if he wants the Uber drivers to get beaten up so that this is going to create a new cycle and sympathy for Uber. Now, my reading is not this. And again, because in the next line it says we should be careful to figure out when and where, so that obviously no one is beaten up. But the elephant in the room here is that the most despicable side here are the demonstrators, are the protesters, are the taxi trade unionists who sanction, or if they didn't sanction, who let happen, or whoever let it happen, this hate and this assault against Uber drivers. So I cannot see why the bad person here is the Uber CEO who says these thugs need to be resisted.
Well, it's because he's a multi-million-dollar CEO of a private corporation. So he has no right to defend himself, and the people who work with him have no right to defend themselves. And also they are automatons, of course, doing the will of the master CEO. So they are also victims of his capitalist free market model. So
because notice they portray it as if he forced the drivers to go to a protest, as if a CEO in France could quote force or could manipulate his drivers to go and get beaten up. So,
but he can because they're lab rats. That's all they are. They're just rats. And they're incentivized, and they're in a different power. They're lower on the hierarchy of power, so they really have no economic choices at all. It's either that or live under an overpass somewhere in Paris. So he's got them trapped. To do his will.
And here is the most despicable.
But you're not taking me. You're not taking me seriously. I'm serious.
By the way, great minds think alike. I had a tweet this morning saying exactly the same thing, that if you tell that Uber, quote, forces either drivers or customers, you basically don't believe in free speech. And in free will. You don't believe in people's agency. And this is what we are seeing. So here is perhaps the most despicable part of the whole report. Quote, Uber drivers were undoubtedly the target of vicious assaults and sometimes murders by furious taxi drivers. By the way, this is just, sometimes they were murdered.
It's not the taxi drivers' faults, by the way. They're fighting for their rights.
Yeah, they were also probably automatons.
That's true too.
And the cab hailing app in some countries found itself battling entrenched and monopolized taxi fleets with cozy relations with city authorities. Uber often characterized its opponents in the regulated taxi market as operating a cartel. So basically here we're told Uber drivers were murdered and Uber is facing a cartel. I'm sure here comes a huge but. Let's see. However, privately, Uber executives and staffers appear to have been in little doubt about the often rogue nature of their operation. So, on the one hand, you have lynchings and murders, and on the other hand, you have people who refer to themselves as pirates or sit talking in WhatsApp and saying, hey, we know we're illegal, but we're going to roll like that. For Guardian, these things are the same. Well, some people murder, some people form a cartel, some people have a monopoly and they're close with the government, but you have these other people who defy this cartel, and these are basically the same. Now, this is despicable. This is morally despicable. And how people are buying into it, and they see this and they say, oh yes, this is great reporting and Uber are the bad guys here. I have no idea.
Well, it's because I read a statistic a while back that by the time somebody is 18 years old, they've seen businessmen murder, rape, and pillage somewhere on the neighborhood of 18,000 times in popular television shows, right? Popular TV and medium, the villain is always the businessman, always the businessman going after his selfish want at the expense of the common good. So it's easy for people to buy this model, this intellectually masturbatory model. I say that because they're not paying attention to the world. They're in a sense presenting a paradigm and then arguing within it. They're not interested in what's going on really out there. Right? They're just proving their own premises. Businessmen are bad. And here's the evidence to prove that they're bad.
So you are right. Here, supposedly, the evidence do the talking. So it's like, we don't need to tell you anything else. Look, the evidence speaks. These people are lobbied, therefore they're bad. But there's something even more interesting in The Guardian, which is going to be our last part of today's talk, which is they're trying to evaluate it. So they have someone who wrote an article about how supposedly this is an attack on democracy, that Uber's lobbying tries to overcome democracy and sidestep democracy. By the way, let me say it for the record that if democracy means that I cannot freely cooperate and I have to be coerced not to voluntarily cooperate and interact with someone else, democracy be damned. But let's see what is this guy's argument, because supposedly democracy versus Uber means that Uber are the bad guys. So listen to this. Again, notice here the cynicism and notice here the disdain about great achievers. Quote, "It is not unusual for an ambitious young company to," what am I reading? Oh, sorry, wrong. Starting again. "There were taxis before there was Uber, just as there were bookshops before Amazon and friends before Facebook. A large part of innovation is new ways to deliver old ideas. Technology gives the innovator an edge by lowering costs, enabling nimbler delivery and outcompeting established traders who are stuck with obsolescent methods. That is the foundational myth of Silicon Valley folklore." So you see, Mark, all this is folklore. We had taxis before Uber. That's no big deal. All that these people did was basically use technology, which was just there in the trees, and they just picked it from the trees. And then they did their shady things with Apple, with lobbying, and that's how they got billionaires. I mean, it's so easy. Me and you could do it, and I'm sure the Guardian reporter could do it.
And leaving these old companies forced to be obsolete, as if they can't make adjustments themselves or use these technologies to streamline their efficiency. Ugh. Leave it to the left to miss the point of pretty much everything. Can I just ask why this person never questions the efficacy of the regulatory state? Why he doesn't see that the regulatory state breeds this kind of, if you can even use the orientation of the author, this kind of corruption, graft, and bribery to get ahead is sort of the name of the game. It's the way the political class plays it, because they control your property. People have to understand that regulatory state isn't about laws that define property and let people know when lines are being crossed and what's punishable. A regulatory state is preemptive control of your property. You live by permission. You don't live by right. It's a very different kind of world. And if I were a CEO having to deal with these chumps, these freaking losers that I have to get permission from, these guys who couldn't start a fucking lemonade stand, and here I am, CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, I'd be treating them with contempt too, because they're contemptible people.
Exactly. And as I wrote on Twitter, again, anyone who thinks that they can do the Uber thing better than Uber, more power to you. I'm sure I'm sure you could be better. I know you don't care about money, but please do us all a favor and consider this horrible, greedy capitalist obsolete. Create your better app, which is going to treat workers better, which is going to be more efficient than Uber. Again, I'm sure it's so easy since you start your article by saying that, well, they didn't do anything. I mean, these things happen all the time, change, technology. So my Guardian friends, do your own Uber app, and I'm sure you're going to do much better than Uber. And I'm sure all the drivers are going to switch to you because you are the real friend.
And can I just say real quick before you go on to the next thing? I really appreciate the greed of Uber because I get something pretty great out of it. I don't appreciate the unspoken greed of the bureaucrat who gets something that and gives me nothing in return. So there's two different types of greeds operating here, and we can't let it pass that the bureaucrat, the controller, the regulator, the Macrons of the world are not greedy little sons of bitches themselves.
By the way, Macron is a good guy in this story because he apparently helped Uber, but anyway. So then he says, it's not unusual for an ambitious young company to pursue commercial interests with abrasive force. Abrasive force. And continue. Ruthlessness is a historic driver of economic evolution. Some innovators have a philanthropic streak. Others are rapacious. So notice here the dichotomy, Mark. You are either ruthless, and how did our friend put it? You're either ruthless and you use abrasive force, or you have this philanthropic streak. Like this isn't a moral argument. This is not even economics anymore. This is a completely flawed understanding of what it means to be, quote, ruthless. I don't see Uber doing anything which is, quote, ruthless. The only ruthless thing I see is people coercing both the drivers and the passengers not to be able to have a voluntary transaction. We've agreed as a society that coercion is wrong in the bedroom, finally. So it's time to also agree and make people understand that coercion is bad elsewhere. It's also bad on the streets, on the boardroom, on every single aspect of life. We want a society without coercion, basically unprovoked coercion, but for the Guardian, that's too much to bear. Shall I go on, or have you got a comment here?
What's that?
Shall I go on, or have you got a comment on the philanthropy versus?
I mean, ruthless to me also can have many contexts, right? I mean, in the way that Rand would sometimes use cruelty, not to mean a meanness, but a recognition of absolutes. Right. And a businessman has to recognize absolutes, which is the Uber people had to recognize the way the political territory lies and what they had to do to overcome that obstacle. And that if it's ruthless to recognize reality and do something about it, so be it. But you're not in business to give away values. You're in business to gain values, just like the consumer is in business to gain values, or you're in the trade to win too. And the beauty of free exchange markets is that everybody profits. It's just that for some reason, these crappy, you would know these people, the Marxist eggheads better than I do. But they're such crass materialists. All they see is the profit on one side because they see money being made and they see one side turning over money. They don't see the immaterial profit, the happiness, the joy, and the billions of other benefits that person gets from retaining the object that they valued more than the money that they gave away.
By the way, there's so many stories about Uber in the Guardian today, and so coming up by the hour that I've lost which article, the title of this article, but it's one that has to do with something on democracy. But let's go on with it because it has some other interesting points. Quote, the pattern across history is that technology smashes its way into an economy and only later once the wider implications are visible, does society organize a political response to mitigate the downside? End of quote. So technology smashes its way, and then society organizes a political response. Two questions. First of all, how does technology, quote, smashes its way? Do you mean that it's so good that people are using it? I guess you do. So then why do you call it smashing the way?
Don't you think these people have bought the I don't want to use this term because it could be mistaken for something that Rand believed, but there is a romantic backlash against technology. The Mary Shelleys of the world and the Bram Stokers and had a romantic attachment to nature as it was, and feared man's hubris at advancing technology and making himself sort of the center of the universe. And this is what this is calling for. It's saying that this technology, it's hubris, and at a certain point, somebody has to come along and put the brakes on this shit, because it's like Frankenstein creating his monster. And then the villagers have to come up with their pitchforks and torches and put a stop to this insanity. What is the insanity? Progress.
It gets worse. Quote. Where are we? Oh, yeah. Oh, but also notice the other thing. Society organizes a political response. Let me translate this to you. It means by political response, they basically mean instigating the use of force. So notice they keep telling us about technology, quote, forcing itself, which again means us adopting it because it's cool. And then society, by the way, who is society? Because again, I don't agree with what, quote, society has to say about Uber. Then society organizes a political response. Political sounds cool. Why don't you call it how it is? Use of coercion and use of force.
Right. Can I also say it also creates a new form of political classmen who can parasitize off the technology and have a stream of revenue that they wouldn't ordinarily have.
Well, and then to show us the author how good he is in history, quote, the Industrial Revolution generated phenomenal wealth for industrialists before they were lost against child labor. So the way this guy has in his mind the Industrial Revolution is that children were working, this created profit for industrialists, and that's the story of, and then the good state came and intervened. This is a view, I don't know, elementary school level, caricature level, but
again, the left has a cartoon version of capitalism in their heads, and they're not open to a real assessment of the way things were. We all know that poor countries have human capital. That's all they can rely on. And, when children are working, it means the country is too poor for them not to. It means the family is too poor for them not to. They're economic assets. And it was progress made possible by fossil fuels. The ghost of Alex Epstein is here, that saved labor and enabled these kids, made us wealthier, more productive, and enabled the kids not to have to work. That came before the laws. The laws piggybacked off of something that was already occurring in the natural world.
Yeah, but in the mind of that person, the capitalists were breaking into houses and dragging children into factories. Anyway, then the brilliant analysis goes on by telling us that Silicon Valley has been unregulated. And the guy doesn't stop for a second to think, why in a world of mostly stagnation is Silicon Valley the only, okay, not the only, but one of the most productive parts? Could it have to do with the fact that it is, quote, unregulated? But he doesn't pause to think about it. And here we go to the most crucial part, and I will close with this. This is the part that The Guardian meets conservatives, and it meets most people, including classical liberals. Quote, the success of liberal democracy, the best model yet devised for organizing people into prosperous and free societies, depends on a balance between the wealth-generating impetus of the market and the obligation politics must impose on business for the greater good. Parenthesis from me, why? Why is this balance needed? Why does the political coercion has to, quote, balance the impetus of wealth generating? Let's find out. Continue the quote. Quote, today, the difference between mainstream left and right in economic policy has come down to the question of where to adjust the levels between those competing demands, where the emphasis falls between the individual freedom to get rich and the collective duty to share. He's 100% right. Both the left and the right agree that there must be some, quote, balance between your individual freedom to pursue your values and your, quote, duty to share. So do you see why we keep losing? We keep losing because we have bought into this. And that somehow there's this conflict on interest. Oh, I have to share and I have a duty, but also I want to pursue my values. So where do I draw the line? So what we need is a morality that says, wrong. This is not this is not the good. The good is not a balance between the two. The good is for you to pursue your values and not harm other people, not initiate force against them, and so on and so forth. But again, the right has totally bought into this, that there is balance between duty and my rights, and this balance is more and more going to the side of the, quote, duty. Why? Because you have all bought into the legitimacy of this moral, quote, balance.
Indeed, I think there's a good book by Peter Schwartz. I don't know if you've read it, The Tyranny of Need. There you go. You're pointing to yes, it's a great book. It talks about, I think, a lot of these issues that were brought up in The Guardian stem from the ethics of altruism, the whole perspective. There you go. If you can read that book, folks, read it, because it's a great takedown of altruist morality and where altruist morality leads. And in many respects, this balance is about, altruism versus individualism, and any compromise with altruism is always a compromise in the wrong direction.
And of course, by altruism, we don't mean being benevolent, a good person, and all that stuff. It means thinking that your number one duty is to sacrifice yourself to others. Let's read some more super chats, and then I'll finish with Uber's pathetic response to all this. Thank you very much, Kiana. We really appreciate your contribution. Thank you very much, Ali. Ali says, Mark and Nikos sarcasm on point today. Indeed, we're both angry, that's why. Bonnie, thank you very much. Marilyn says she loves Uber, and we love you, Marilyn, but also Uber. Kathleen says, I bet that the Guardian journalists use Uber. Yes, of course they do. No doubt about that. Jonathan, thank you for your contribution, and it was so good to see you at Ocon. Enric says, what determines the greater good? That's a great question, Enric. So the greater good is determined by two ways, either by a decision of someone who is an opinion maker, a philosopher king, a central planner, or best case, by people voting together to tell you what is good for you, and the majority winning and you having to suck it up. That's what determines the, quote, greater good. Any comment on the greater good, Mark, before we get to Uber's pathetic reaction?
Yeah, I prefer to look at it as the greater good is my good, and the greater good is your good, and the greater good is somebody else's good, and they need not conflict if they're rational.
Indeed. And again, if someone believes that my pursuit of values is, quote, hurting them, they need to make the case on why this is so and how exactly am I doing that. So what was Uber's reaction? Did they say, to hell with you, we have a right to exist, we have a right to pursue our profit, to pursue our values, and so do our customers and our workers? Of course, no. Uber basically fall into knees and they apologized. They said, we're so sorry. We had this horrible CEO, but now we've changed. Kalanick is not anymore with us. Please don't judge us by these horrible things. Now we're different. We have a new corporate responsibility policy. We brought a new person and all that. Instead of commenting on this, I want to read one line from Atlas Shrugged. Someone says, a businessman sends to Hank Rearden, "It's no time to boast about being rich when the populace is starving. It's just goading them on to seize everything." And Hank replies, "But telling them that you have no right to your wealth while they have is what's going to restrain them?" And later, when he speaks with more businessmen who are like scared and say, "Well, you know, don't be too loud about our rights to our profit and all that stuff," he says, "I'm sorry, gentlemen, that I will be obliged to save your goddamn necks along with mine." And that's what I would also say to Uber. I'm really sorry that I have to defend you when you don't see how you have to defend yourself, and you don't see how by appeasing your enemies, by appeasing people who want to destroy you, and by appeasing people who think that they're doing you a favor by letting you work, you're making a huge mistake. And this is your only mistake. You haven't done anything else wrong, but this is your mistake. And also not paying me to lobby for you and paying other random academics, but we covered that.
Yeah, well, see, that's the ethics of altruism raising its ugly head. These people don't think they have a right to exist or to pursue values in the way that they think is best for themselves. The altruist society is a society that exists by permission, where those who would seek to achieve and create values have to get the permission of those who don't. It's an inverted pyramid in my view, and it should be annihilated as soon as possible. Uber, get some fucking balls, pardon my French, and stand up for yourself. Macron, all of these bureaucrats, like every other bully in the world, they're just empty suits. You punch them once in the mouth and they go away.
So again, all this, our source was The Guardian. Today, everywhere under the title, The Uber Files, you can see many articles. We mostly were based on the main story and on a story which till then I've lost because there are now so many. Oh, yeah, I found it. So I was reading you from the article, The Uber Files Tell a Simple Truth. Democracy depends on curbing mercenary tech giants, by someone called Ruthlessness.
Mercenary. Listen to this creep. Hey, can I just say one thing really fast? The Guardian, you suck. You're an awful newspaper. You're terrible. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Uber disagrees with you. So again, they're on their knees, apologizing and begging for mercy. You know who does not beg for mercy? Harry Binswanger, who is going to be with us in 9 p.m. UK time, HBTV. Today he's talking about climate change and how we need to perceive this whole problem. Okay, thank you very much for being with us. Mark, this was a fun episode in terms of these things look so clear, morally crystal clear, and yet for some reason, most people are missing it, which also means we need to do a better job. Let's not blame the people for not getting it. Let's do a better job, all of us in the quote movement or in the objectivist universe or however we want to call it, so that people will get it. Thanks a lot, Mark. Many thanks to our viewers, our super chatters. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. See you. Peace.